Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
Buenos nachos.
If you've got a tip for Melissa, an unsolved case in your hometown, a case you've heard of and want to know more about, who does that creepy voice on hold when you call the CVS pharmacy, anything, tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. You just might hear your tip on the podcast. And now here's your host, digging up dirty deeds like her dogs dig up the yard, Melissa Morgan.
Bark, bark, more cowbell. Producer Mark, the dogs don't really dig it up anymore unless there's a bunny taunting them. They do, however, pee copious amounts of urine, shit, human-sized turds, and other sort of destructive things. But the digging...
I'm sure our audience just loves that as the intro. First-time listeners, welcome aboard.
Wow.
Now,
okay.
Now, but that's true.
Who's on fire today?
That does not make that untrue, though. That's, it's bad.
What?
But they do dig up the yard, though.
Are you doing your own show? Am
No.
I here? I don't even know what's happening. What is going on? The dogs, yeah, they do some digging, but oh my.
Well, your description of their other stuff is very compelling, and I can't deny that it's true.
Yeah. Mostly they hunt for lizards and stuff like that. But yeah, if you want to just hang on to the whole digging part, please feel free.
Well, it's mostly around the back where we don't watch them most of the time. I was back there today.
Oh no!
When the appraiser comes by, there's no
Did you
no
find
holes.
a body?
Yeah.
Oh no!
No. Although yes, the girl dog was looking for lizards.
Was there an arm or anything?
Maybe a lizard arm. It was a live lizard arm, and it got away.
Oh,
but
did the appraiser find any, like a skull or anything?
Yeah, and he took it with him. I don't really know what that
That's
was
good.
about.
That's fine.
So.
That's fine. Yeah. There's an interesting skull connection at the end of this, which will be, I think, pretty fascinating. And to answer your question, I think it's widely known that the voice on the CVS hold button is Dinah Shore. So,
it's the late Dinah Shore.
Oh no. Is it the ghost of Dinah Shore?
It's creepy, though,
if
man.
If you call to get a prescription refilled, what happens? Dinah Shore's like, it's butter. No, that's Paula Deen. I get all my Southern women confused.
I think Dinah Shore did do that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
If you think it's butter, but it's not, it's Dinah Shore.
Yeah, on the hold at CVS.
You're on something today.
Yeah.
On fire or on crack or something. So I was fascinated by this story, and I thought I would do it in honor of our beloved Aussies, who, after I gave you a big shout out a couple weeks ago for zooming up the charts, coming in right under the US of A, on top of the UK and Canada. That sounds dirty. You've kind of slowed down a little bit, Aussies. So let's kick it back up to gear, shall we? I'm doing this in honor of you because this is a Australian national who comes across the big body of water and becomes an American nightmare. Although he did wreak a little havoc in your home Aussie land of Sydney-ish, Australia. So it's this is kind of cheekily not my favorite title. He is known as the Beauty Queen Killer. He did have an eye for the ladies, Christopher Bernard Wilder. And I'm always surprised when someone does so much in so little time, and then I'm sort of not privy to what happened or who this was. And maybe it was because it was, I was in my teens or, and I wasn't really paying attention to dudes who went across the country killing people in a 6-week time span that other people would take, decades to accomplish. I mean, he was motivated. So Christopher Bernard Wilder, born in March of 1945 in Sydney, Australia. And he was the son of an Australian national and a U.S. Navy guy. So he's half Australian and half, mutt or whatever he is from his dad's side. And he almost died during his birth, but they revived him. And then when he was about 2, almost drowned in a backyard swimming pool. So I want to just stop here at the beginning and say a lot of the things I'm reading and research I'm doing, which would horrify most everyone else, they're saying a lot of early childhood trauma can result in apparently mostly men. I don't hear so much about it affecting women in the same way, but early childhood trauma, either a brain injury or lack of oxygen or emotional trauma, can really affect the brain, obviously, and a man when he gets older. And this, I'm not giving him any excuses because there are none. There are none. But he had a bizarre life, a very easy, cushy life. He was very smart, but he had some weird things happen. So, and one, I'm going to blame his parents because they seem to, perhaps it was out of guilt. I do not know. But they seem to bail him out figuratively and financially, literally, several times in his life when he should have been incarcerated or put in a mental institution. But he was, given a go pass from his parents bailing him out. It's kind of a frightening story, but especially actually even the judicial system let him go on things that he should never have been allowed out ever again. And he was given like probation and ridiculous things. So Christopher Wilder, after surviving the almost drowning at the age of 2 and almost dying at the age of 1 day, gosh, sometimes I wish it just, he would have just gone gentle into that good night. I'm not saying, like that his mom should have rolled over on the birthing table and sat on his face, or maybe I am saying that, or that they, should have just let him drown in the pool. Okay, I might be saying that too. So he's a young man, like 17, and he does have a habit of pleading guilty when he's caught. He pleads guilty.
Well, that's downright honest of him.
But he doesn't get in trouble. You'll see he pleads guilty to several things in the United States, and it's like, what? You don't serve any time, and I don't. So I do not know the laws in Australia, and this is obviously in the early 60s. So things could be very different. But he and a group of friends plead guilty to a gang rape on a beach in Sydney. Now, he pleads guilty to, and I just thought this was a really shitty movie with like Anne Margaret. He pleads guilty to carnal knowledge. I didn't even know that was a charge.
I didn't either.
I thought it was a shitty movie.
Well, it was that too, but...
So he pleads guilty to carnal knowledge. He's sentenced to probation. It could be because he's underage. I don't know. But he's sentenced to probation. He receives electroshock therapy. Now, say what you will. I am not pro or con. I don't know enough. Doesn't sound like it would be a great thing, but there are probably some people that, get some sort of help. Apparently, this just, ramped up his sexual appetite. And they say there's actually evidence that it exacerbated his violent sexual tendencies. Yippee! So he gets married at the age of 23 in 1968, but his wife leaves him after 1 week because she found women's underwear, not hers, not his, and lots of photos of naked women. So after 1 week, she leaves. So he emigrates to the U.S. in 1969. He lands in Boynton Beach, Florida. And I don't know if it's money from his family or he just trips and falls into a pile of money. There's quite a bit of parallel lives here with Gary Heidnik. He makes a lot of money. Christopher Wilder is very successful and is a big fan of the John Knowles book, The Collector, where a man kidnaps a woman and keeps her against her will in his basement or cellar until she dies. So he has that book, and it is with him through his entire life, and it's found in his possessions when he is dead. Spoiler alert, he doesn't make it out. It is a weird way that he dies, and they still, I don't understand this, that they still can't figure out if it was suicide or homicide. You'll understand why it's just the whole thing is just so weird.
Okay,
so,
now I'm interested.
Yeah, it's very strange, and it's not like it was from 1874. It's 1984. So it should be easy to answer, and yet it's just not. Maybe that's the way he liked it, is layered and confusing and fucked up and weird. I don't know. So he's in Boynton Beach, Florida. He buys 6 parcels of real estate. He just keeps making money. I guess apparently he also had some electrical contracting kind of a bent, and he uses that later on to torture people with his electric copper wire. Sound familiar, like Gary Heidnick? A little bit. Little bit. So instead of investing in the stock market and Playboy and Tasty Cakes, he buys real estate in Florida, and he develops a fondness for photography, which apparently he had in Australia. That's why his wife left when she found the many photos of many naked chicks. He, was very good at convincing women that he was a photographer for a modeling agency, and it was a really interesting ruse that he used. So he has this like mansion that it has a boat dock, and he races cars. He actually came in 17th in the Miami Grand Prix.
Wow.
Yeah. And he raced a Porsche 911. I'm sure he probably had, some pretty cool ass cars. And he had a real eye for beautiful brunettes. That's one of the reasons he was given the moniker, the beauty queen killer. He wasn't into, kidnapping plain Janes. He was into kidnapping beautiful model girls.
So he was really kind of like a rich Florida playboy.
He was. There's a great article in Time magazine from like 1984, just shortly after his capture / death. And, and they're calling him like, the the man about town, the playboy man about town. And he was only 39, when he died. So he managed to pack a whole lot into that time that he was in the U.S., bringing his horror from Australia to the shores of the U.S. So in March of 1971 in Pompano Beach, he's picked up on a charge of soliciting women to pose for nude photos. He enters a plea of guilty to disturbing the peace, and he pays a small fine. In October of 77, he coerces a female high school student into performing oral sex and threatens to beat her if she refuses. He admits the crime to his therapist, but the interviews are confidential and inadmissible in court, so he's acquitted. In June of 1980, he lures a teenage girl into his car with promises of a modeling job, and he drives her to a rural area and rapes her. A guilty plea of those charges of attempted sexual battery earns him 5 years probation and further court-ordered therapy. And then when he's arrested for the last time, he complains of blackouts. He gets probation and pays a $400 fine, just like the smallest, most bizarre things I've ever...
All these crimes in the United States?
Yeah, in Florida.
Okay, I guess maybe it was just because of the times.
I wonder.
My God, I mean...
It's really bizarre to me that he, 4 to 5 times before he actually kicked into gear and started being actually tied to rapes and murders, he had obviously done some things that he hadn't been caught. It's very odd to me that he, I think a repeat offender, maybe that's where the, the 3 strikes law comes into play here. I just am like, what? I mean, my head's spinning on that one. Yours and mine both, because I feel like if he had been arrested and held on any of the previous charges, there would be 8 to 10 women that we know of that would still be alive. There are probably many more that we don't know of. So this, not to skip around too much, but this trauma to his brain, perhaps during birth, trauma to his brain, perhaps during an almost drowning. There are, psychologists and laymen who think that that sort of trauma can, perhaps affect the limbic system, the pleasure center, where you just want to constantly do what you want, have what you want, be what you want. And it, that doesn't necessarily conform to social mores. You can't just walk around finding attractive brunettes and raping and killing them because that's what your limbic system says I want to do on a Tuesday. You can't just do that. So again, I'm not giving him any excuse because there is none. But it is fascinating that these sort of pieces of information come out. Those sorts of things are usually held close to the vest, and the more that time goes on, and they can link specific trauma, childhood trauma, to someone who does these horrible things, it may just be like everybody. I just don't know one human who doesn't have trauma, who has not experienced trauma. I don't know anyone. And my version of trauma could be very small, and your version of trauma could be very big, but they are still trauma events to each of us. So again, I can't give him any leeway for his, bizarre life and eventual spree across the country. So, but back to 1982, he visits his parents, and here I do fault them. So when he's visiting his parents, and he kidnaps two 15-year-old girls from a beach in New South Wales on December 28th of 1982, and he forces them to pose for pornographic snapshots. He's traced through the license number of a rented car, and he's arrested on the 29th, charged with kidnapping and indecent assault. And his family posts the $350,000 bail, and then he's permitted to go to the U.S., and his trial is scheduled for May 7th of 1983, but there are legal delays and postponements because he's rich and has a great attorney, and then he's scheduled to appear on April 3rd of 1984, which he doesn't make. So that's a bummer. So in early 1984, it's actually middle of February, he begins a 6-week cross-country crime spree across the U.S., and he leaves, 8 or 9 victims again that we know of. There are probably more. But the first murder that's attributed to Christopher Wilder is Rosario Gonzalez, who's seen on February 26th of 1984 at the Miami Grand Prix, and she was a model. And he probably, told her that he, was a photographer, and he was racing in the Grand Prix. She's never been found. On March 5th, I think he realized either that things were coming down, that he was going to have to go back to Australia and face the music, and I think it amped him up. So on March 5th, his former girlfriend, Elizabeth Kenyon, who was a Miss Florida finalist, goes missing. Now, Rosario Gonzalez and Elizabeth Kenyon have never been found. Elizabeth Kenyon's parents said that she had described Christopher Wilder as a real gentleman, and unlike other photographers who'd asked her to model, he was polite, and they dated for a short period of time, but, she disappears and she's never found. Her bad luck to have thought he was a perfect gentleman. So he turns 39 on March 13th, and he buys himself a 1973 Chrysler. It's 3 days later, the Miami Herald puts together that this Boynton Beach, bachelor race car driver is wanted for questioning in the disappearance of these two local women, Rosario Gonzalez and Elizabeth Kenyon. And he wasn't actually named in the story, but he gets the point that, they're looking for him. So he doesn't go to his scheduled therapy on March 17th. He meets his business partner that night and says, I'm not going to jail. I'm not going to do it. He packs his car. He drops off his dogs at a kennel and leaves town. So Indian Harbor is 2 hours north of Boynton Beach. It's now March 19th. Terry Ferguson, 21-year-old, disappears from a local shopping mall where witnesses remember seeing her with Wilder. And her body is found 4 days later in a Polk County canal. On March 20th, Christopher Wilder abducts a university co-ed whose name will not be mentioned because she survived from a shopping mall in Tallahassee, but he drives her across the state line to Bainbridge, Georgia. He stays in a cheap motel. She's raped repeatedly. He tortures her with electric shocks to her feet with the wiring that he's, adept at using. He smears super glue on her eyelids and dries it with a blow dryer.
Oh, God. Oh, my.
She gets away from being bound and tied and locks herself in the bathroom and starts pounding on the walls and screaming until people come to her rescue. He takes everything from the room, including her items, and leaves before anyone gets to him. He then moves on to Beaumont, Texas. So on March 21st, Terry Walden, a 24-year-old married mother and a nursing student, said that on the campus, a man approached her and asked her if she would like to model for him. And she thanked him profusely but declined the offer. And her husband remembered that when she disappeared on March 23rd. And her body was found 3 days later in a canal. She had been stabbed multiple times and tortured with electric shock. On March 25th, 1984, 21-year-old Suzanne Logan disappears from a shopping mall in Oklahoma City. Her body is found the next day floating in the Milford Reservoir in Manhattan, Kansas. She'd been raped and stabbed and tortured. Cheryl Bonaventura was abducted from a shopping mall in Grand Junction, Colorado on March 29th.
Jeez.
Mm-hmm. There was another shopper in the mall that identified Christopher Wilder as someone who was soliciting women for modeling jobs. And then he was seen later that night with Cheryl at a restaurant. She goes missing. She's found much later after he's already gone. On April 1st, 17-year-old Michelle Korfman vanishes from a fashion show at the Meadows Mall in Las Vegas. Now, this one's a little more detailed because there are pictures of him watching her. Pictures from the fashion show show Christopher Wilder sitting there with his balding head and his legs crossed and his weird little beard smirking. And he's watching beautiful young girls parade. It's a teenage fashion show. And he has a camera around his neck, probably going to say, "Hey, I'm a photographer. I'd like to take your picture. And then I'd like to rape and kill you." Oh, I'm going to leave that part out so you don't hear that. I'm going to say that really soft off to the side. So it's now 3 murders, 1 kidnapping, and 4 disappearances that are sort of linked to Christopher Wilder. So the FBI finally decides, you know what? I think we ought to pay attention to this fucker. So he is considered a significant danger, and his name is added to the Bureau's top 10 most wanted on April 3rd of 1984.
Ironically, the date of his hearing, I think. Isn't that the date?
Yeah, he should have been in Australia that day, you're right. Which he wasn't. The following day, he abducts 16-year-old Tina Marie Riccio in Torrance. He rapes her throughout that night, and then they stay at various motels successive evenings. And he considered her robotic enough that she would help him lure other women. Now, if you're a 39-year-old man and you have a 16-year-old girl with you, you could say, "This is my daughter, and she's a model, and I would like to take pictures of you too." And I feel so bad for her because she was, I don't know if she had enough time to develop Stockholm Syndrome, but he definitely subjected her to threats of death and abused her. And finally, she agrees to help him find other victims.
Oh, that's horrible.
Uh-huh.
This is in California now?
Mm-hmm.
Because
in
you said
Torrance.
Torrance,
Yep.
California. Oh, my God.
Yep. So they travel around, moving day to day so he doesn't get caught. On April 10th, Dawnette Wilt is lured away from a shopping mall in Indiana. He rapes and tortures her through April 10th and through the 11th while Tina Riccio is driving. He tries to murder her on April 12th in Rochester, New York, but she manages to survive. He stabs her and beats her. She ties jeans around her body. That's all she has left that hasn't been shredded. She staggers to the nearest highway. There's a truck driver who sees her, drives her to a hospital where a surgeon performs life-saving surgery on her, and she survives.
Oh, thank God.
And she tells the police he's headed toward Canada. That's what she tells them. So his final victim is Beth Dodge, and he abducts her near Victor, New York on April 12th. And he shoots her to death and leaves her in a gravel pit. So following her murder, he must have known that shit was it was going to happen. He takes Tina Riccio to Boston's Logan Airport, and he purchases a one-way ticket to Los Angeles and walks her to the gate.
God, that's weird.
He lets her go.
Thank God. I mean, thank God, but it's just the whole thing is just weird.
Uh-huh. So we can't explain why he has this sudden attack of compassion. Perhaps it's because she'd helped lure some victims and he felt like she's proved her loyalty. I'm going to get her a ticket so she can go home and the rest of her life is ruined, but I'll let her go home. So he brandishes a gun on April 13th at a woman in Beverly, Massachusetts, but she flees on foot and she is unharmed. So he stops for gas the following afternoon in Colebrook, New Hampshire. And he doesn't know, he's gassing up. He doesn't know this is the end. So 2 state troopers, Wayne Fortier and Leo Jellison, recognize Wilder's car from FBI descriptions. They approach the vehicle. They call out to him, and he makes a break for the car. He dives inside, and while he's in his car, he retrieves a Colt Python 357 Magnum. And there's a fight for the gun. One shot, Leo Jellison grabs him from behind. So the first shot, I'm guessing Leo Jellison is trying to weasel the gun out of Wilder's hand, and he turns it toward himself, really trying to probably kill himself. So the first shot passes through Christopher Wilder and pierces Jellison's chest, and it lodges in his liver. The second one, a coroner describes it as cardiac obliteration. The second one just obliterates Wilder's heart. Jellison has life-saving surgery. He does survive, but he's serious condition for a long time. So kind of a really bizarre follow-up is that a day or two after a coroner in New Hampshire, Dr. Robert Christie, he's in charge of Wilder's case. After he performs the autopsy on Christopher Wilder, he receives a phone call from a man claiming to be a representative from Harvard University, and they want Christopher Wilder's brain to study in order to determine whether there's a defect in his brain, if the birth trauma, the drowning trauma had done something to alter his brain, and that something had sparked his killing spree, if there was a disease or a tumor. And Dr. Christie says, you know what? Okay, I'll deliver his brain to Harvard University. Just send me a written request. And they never got one. And 2 weeks later, he calls the university, and they have no idea what he's talking about.
What?
So nobody from Harvard requested Christopher Wilder's brain, but someone did and never showed up for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay is right. So we know the things that he is connected to. And here are possible other victims. And I know my Aussie peeps are going to know about the Wanda Beach murders, which he is a suspect in 2 unsolved murders in January of 1965. Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock, he would have been 20. These 2 beautiful 15-year-old girls were kidnapped, raped, and murdered and buried on a beach. And they believe, because of the similarity to the cases, that Christopher Wilder could have done this. And he didn't head to the United States till he was 23. So it was 3 years before he left.
So he may have had practice.
Yeah. I believe he absolutely. And there are a few more that he's not going to be convicted of, but that he may have been tied to. So I think he did have practice. At 17, he's, gets probation for carnal knowledge for watching a really shitty film.
All I can see in my head are Art Garfunkel and Margaret.
Yeah. See, I was like, why is that even a charge? I thought it was just a bad film. So he's 17 when he, pleads guilty to carnal knowledge. Perhaps when he's 20, he kills 2 15-year-old girls. Probably. When he's 23, he heads to the U.S. to expand his horizons of killing. He is a suspect in an unsolved disappearance of Mary Oppitz and Mary Hare. Mary Hare is found. Mary Oppitz has never been found. They just still really feel like that it's...
Where was that?
That is in Florida. It's in Fort Myers in 81. January of 81.
Yeah, it sounds like he did have a lot of practice.
Mm-hmm. In 82, the skeletal remains of 2 unidentified women are unearthed near property that was owned by Wilder in Loxahatchee, Florida. They're not identified. One is never identified, and one is not identified till 2013. In 1983, Sherry Lynn Ball, a 20-year-old aspiring model, goes missing from Boca Raton, Florida, and her decomposed body is found by a hunter in New York sometime later in 83, but she's not identified till 2014. So there's a list of women that could potentially be tied to him. We won't know. He did leave a large amount of money, like millions of dollars, in his estate. In 1986, a court-appointed arbiter ruled that after a tax balance is paid, it's to be divided between the families of his victims. But it doesn't matter how much it is. It's never going to...
Not enough.
Never. It's never going to be enough. But I think that if there's a lesson here, if a charming, intelligent man who drives nice cars approaches you and says, "Can I take your picture?" you kick him really hard in the fucking nuts and say, "I have an iPhone that takes better pictures than you ever will, fucker. Eat my dust." And more cowbell.
And remember, if you've got a tip for Melissa, please give her a call at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837. Or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com.